Okay, thank you so much for having us. And thank you everyone for being here. Just let me know if you're not hearing me. I'm not used to holding a microphone. Um, so I want to kick us off by introducing the panelists. Furthest from me is Forrest Young. Forrest Young is a visionary design leader and educator. Most recently, he served as executive director of design at FUNDAMENTALco, a value creation consultancy born out of Blackstone. Before that, he was global head of brand at Rivian, the design-led electric mobility company behind one of the largest IPOs in US history. He was also the first chief creative officer at Wolf Olins, which was named Fast Company's most innovative company for design during his tenure. As an educator, Forrest has taught graduate design at Yale, RISD, CCA, and serves as a founding advisor for Miller Knowles Diversity in Design Initiative. His work has earned him top industry honors, including a Gold Design Lion at Cannes and the ADC Black Cube. Through his private studio Young Work, he creates multi-dimensional projects for leading artists, including painter Titus Kapfer, poet Reginald Dwayne Betts, and Tavares Strachan's Arctic Ice Project. Welcome, Forrest. Woo! Next, we have Dina. I had to spell out the phonetic, so here we go. Fair-u-yulo. Dina is an epic name. Dina is a lifelong New Yorker and a civil engineer dedicated to shaping the city's infrastructure with both precision and care. With over 15 years of experience, she has led major public works across New York City for infrastructure upgrades, streetscape designs, to large-scale affordable housing developments. Through her firm, DMF Engineering, Dina delivers solutions that balance technical excellence with practical application, especially when working with agencies like New York City Department of Transportation, NYC EDC, DDC, MTA, and I'm always like, is this Pan New York, New Jersey? Is it Panny? Port Authority. Okay. I was like, I wonder what this means. Alongside private sector developers. She also co-chairs the Women's Transportation Seminar Greater New York Mentoring Program, supporting women in engineering and transportation. And Dina is a graduate of the 2025 Business Growth for Creative Entrepreneurs Program. Welcome, Dina. And finally, we have Kemp Atwood. As a founding partner and chief creative officer of Area 17, Kemp Atwood leads global design and strategy across the agency studios in Paris and New York. Over more than a decade, he's helped shape the agency's design philosophy and led major client engagements in both cities. Previously, Kemp was a senior art director at Second Story in Portland, where he developed digital and immersive experiences for the Smithsonian, National Geographic, and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. His early work at CBC Radio 3 garnered awards from Communication Arts, the Arts Directors Club, and the New York Festivals. He holds a BA in Creative Writing and Literature from York University and a post-diploma certificate in New Media Design from Bell's Center for Creative Communication. Area 17's clients include OpenAI, New York Times, and Getty. Welcome, Kemp. Okay, so we have about an hour together, and I will check my watch to make sure we stay on track here. And I want to kind of set the tone for the evening. We're all here to talk about AI and creativity, and I'm going to try to break the evening up into 3 sections, starting with the philosophical, and then moving into creativity and mastery, and finally we'll talk a little bit more specifically about how we're thinking about regulations and leadership as we move into this new era. And as I was planning this panel, I was really trying to think about how I wanted to frame it. I've never done a panel before, so thanks for being patient with me. And as I was putting it together, I thought a lot about how I use AI, and I would consider myself like a bit of a late adapter. I didn't really dive into it until maybe last year when I used it to do a lot of technical things, such as a business consultant, writing job descriptions, creating training programs for people, helping people set goals, formulate strategic plans. And then one night, full disclosure, after a tiny edible, I decided that I was going to have a seance with ChatGPT. And so tonight, we are also going to have a seance with ChatGPT together, collectively. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to invoke some living and dead spirits along with some characters that are just characters. And we're going to talk through these sections. And at the end, we're going to guess and then reveal who we invoked in our seance, who ChatGPT has told us we've invoked. So to kick us off, I want to start with Howard Gardner. We're going to invoke Howard Gardner. Does anybody know who Howard Gardner is? Ooh, Forrest. I was like, Forrest is 100% going to know who Howard Gardner is. Okay, so Howard Gardner is sort of known as the father, founder, although it's not a thing, of multiple intelligences. Has anybody heard about multiple intelligence? Okay, so Howard Gardner, he's a professor at Harvard still, I believe, and Frames of Mind is his book that came out in 1983. If you've never read it, especially as a creative person, I cannot recommend it enough. When I was at Berklee School of Music in Boston in early 2000s, I used to cross the Charles and go listen to Howard speak about this idea of multiple intelligences, because I myself am not a test taker. I would not say that I'm good at, technical intelligence. And so it was a real relief to find out that there was more way to think about being intelligent in the world. And I think it's had a big impact on how I think about that for myself moving forward. But now we find ourselves in this time where we have artificial intelligence. And suddenly, after, decades of understanding intelligence as being plural, we have all of a sudden now started to constrict ourselves. And AI has risen to the forefront, and we see intelligence in one way. And we think about, AGI and what's going to happen when it becomes smarter than all of us in this one way. So I want to kick off our panel in the spirit of Howard Gardner and ask each of you to tell us how you define intelligence. And Forrest, we'll start with you.
I think that, thank you, Howard. I think I totally agree with Holly that multiple intelligences was long overdue. For me, the definition of intelligence is purely adaptive capacity. I think that people who are truly intelligent have an intuitive way to react to change. And I think that is perfect for this moment in time. But I think it's kind of like a graphic equalizer. If you take all of Howard's intelligences, spatial, kinesthetic, I think it's just a different EQ setting for each way in which you're capacitizing yourself to a particular context.
Thank you, Forrest. Dina?
I think my definition of intelligence is pretty similar, just maybe articulated a little differently, where it's how your mind and body processes the world. It's not necessarily what you know. It might be what you don't know, because I think self-awareness is a version of that. But it's really how you notice patterns, how you recognize gaps in things, and connect together different ideas, whether it's numbers, emotion, design, the built environment. I think it's a little innate and maybe a little bit learned.
Yeah, well, I would say building on both of those, I don't have too much to add other than maybe just to make for myself the differentiation between information and intelligence, that intelligence is acting on information, making some kind of action, whether that's making patterns, connecting information to create insights. And I think what you were getting at, this idea of nuance. I think intelligence is aware that it's interpreting information. And so there's this knowledge built into intelligence that it's not fact. And I think that's an important part of thinking about intelligence.
Thank you. So this question is for you, Dina. I think building off of what Kemp just said about nuance. As an engineer, have you ever had to defend nuance in environments that demand binary thinking?
Yes, I would say I do so every day. Ironically, one of the reasons I think I became an engineer was I wanted to live or work in what I thought would be a black and white environment. And I think a lot of people or engineers have that view of the profession. But really, I think what makes a great engineer is the ability to navigate the gray area where our clients or decision makers are constantly looking for yes or no, compliant or non-compliant. But a lot of the times, I should also mention that I'm an engineer in New York City, which is one of the most dense environments to design and construct in. And a lot of times, the codes and regulations often kind of box you into a corner or preclude meeting one from another. So it's really up to the engineer and our professional judgment to do what is best for the client, the project, the community. And oftentimes that is not what's in the code, because what's in the code is typically the most simple way to go about something, least resistance, but it might not be the best thing for the community or long-term impact.
Well, that's interesting when you say like what's in the code. And it makes me think about, we spent time this week in an AI class talking about the difference between predictive and deterministic thinking. And when you say like what's in the code, I think, Forrest, my next question for you is, in using AI, how do creatives, rethink their identity when they're looking at this blank, they're starting with this blank space. And I think creative people often are used to having some form of control over their creativity. But all of a sudden, when you're generating through AI, there might be a sense of loss of identity or loss of control, or you kind of have to Dina's point, interpret that code, right? What gets generated for you. And how have you observed, how that either impacts you as a creative or you've seen with other creatives?
Keeping in mind that we're having an active seance, I think that akin to the evil queen from Snow White looking in front of the magic mirror, what are you summoning? What are you asking for? You could say, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Or you could say, how can we solve world hunger? Like, you're dealing with a vending machine that is supposed to be 47 inches, and you're trying to request a Snickers, and all of a sudden extends to 47 miles. So what you're summoning, what you're asking for, is actually a declaration of who you want to become, which is actually a kind of a scarier question. Because if you can ask for anything, what you ask for ultimately is a stance on, who you're trying to be. You're bridging towards a future version of yourself. I think the second part of what you're summoning is also, what are you surrendering? What are you giving up? I remember I was frustratingly trying to prompt a clownfish, and it kept putting eyeballs on the tail of the clownfish. And I kept saying, no, ChatGPT, don't put eyeballs. And it kept saying, oh, no, I'm going to put 6 eyeballs on the tail. And it was this kind of act of surrendering an aspect of control. But ultimately, what is this dance? And ultimately, what do I have identified as who I am relative to craft that I'm willing to surrender to actually deepen the relationship with what I'm making?
Interesting. So let's build the bridge then to the actual technology, because Kemp, I think at Area 17, where you all work in actually building these technologies, I'm curious how all of the narratives that are swirling right now impact how you all think about the technologies that you're building. And if you feel like, and especially in the creative realm, are there narratives that are missing?
I mean, I think that one of the underrepresented narratives gets a little bit to what you were saying about what you're summoning, which is, we talk a lot about the productivity of AI, and we're afraid of how many outputs are coming. And we tell our clients that AI is not a value proposition. And I think that we tend to have this idea that, okay, AI is going to come in and it's going to fix a lot of things. But we're coaching our clients to think about what is the end result? What is the outcome that we're working towards? And I think that there's the general kind of, we've talked. You mentioned earlier that just AI, so many conversations about AI are happening, and cutting through that to what end? And I think that's the dominant thing that we're trying to coach our clients with right now.
And I'm curious, this is a question for everyone. We'll close out this section with Howard. If we're redefining intelligence in this era, right, and maybe we're resisting the idea that there's a singularity, or, you know, we don't know where we fall on the spectrum. So I'm curious to hear, how might you think education needs to evolve in this era based on the technologies that we're presented with, especially when it comes to creativity? Forrest, why don't you start?
So I think the best teachers that I've had, and I think, you know, all of us probably can count on our hands the truly great teachers that really resonated with what we were doing. There's a difference between a teacher that I think is cloning. So I think this is, to me, is like bad education, where you're trying to clone and replicate what a teacher is doing or saying. And I think where education needs to evolve is a practice of cultivation, of trying to understand what is unique and idiosyncratic about each practitioner, and ultimately helping to cheerlead that and to spot that and to create a safe environment free from, I think, spaces that feel like you're constantly being surveilled. Everyone's got their phones out and you're feeling like you're being, you know, you're going to be on TikTok in 2 seconds. And so I think providing a safe space to fail or to go deeper in that journey to self.
Dina.
I think Forrest was the one who used the letters EQ, and that's a big thing of what I'm trying to bring to my new engineering firm, in that I've just been trained from the technical side most of my education and career, and I definitely think there is some softer skill that gets missing in typical education. I think integrating AI into an engineering practice really levels people a little bit more. So yeah, I would like to see a little bit more rounded out version of education than such a focus on the technical, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of direct education, I'm not sure. I think in terms of training and what I think that we need to be thinking about, it gets back to my earlier comment, but we think about it as an 80-20 rule. We often think of, okay, we're going to put a little bit in, we're going to get a whole lot out, and we get all these outputs. But when we're engaging with AI, if we can give 80% of our perspective, we're going to get 20% of actual value back. And so I think it's really about critical thinking and having teaching, I guess, just to be looking for what meaning really is versus these outputs. You know, I think there was a study that just came out a couple of days ago where Apple was challenging whether or not the LRM is actually reasoning or not, and I think that the I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I very much apologize. I lost my train of thought.
Okay, no problem. I think that, you know, what you're saying though about the idea of like challenging things and the way, is it actually thinking? And I want to use that to connect back to Forrest. You used idiosyncrasy. Dina, you kind of brought in the EQ back to it. And one thing that, you know, as we go beyond intelligence, I think the next phase that we think about is this idea of mastery, right? So when we are in a creative practice, I think most people go into a creative practice because there is some sort of commitment to the mastery of whatever that creativity is. And I would even say in engineering too, that's probably a thing as well. So we'll take this moment to bring in our second spirit. And for that, to move us into mastery, we are going to bring in some swans. So last week, I was up at Lincoln Center. Jillian Murphy, who is a prima ballerina for American Ballet Theater, she retired. It was an epic evening at the theater, and she chose Swan Lake. And Swan Lake is really interesting because it's also known as a ballet of protest. So when the Soviet Union fell, it played on TV repeatedly. And it's so hard. It's one of the hardest ballets that you'll ever dance. And within that ballet, there are two swans. There's Odette and Odile, and they represent the light and the dark. So the white swan, and most of you probably know the black swan, which is apparently playing in IMAX. soon. So, side note. So I want to invoke them because you cannot dance a ballet like Swan Lake without mastery. And part of what I feel like I witness in students and clients, especially as AI gets integrated into a creative practice, is almost like a sorrow, or even if they're not conscious of it, or there's a judgment, and usually under a judgment is a sorrow. And so I want to talk a little bit about mastery, right? And how the landscape of AI changes what we are actually mastering. And that's where I think about, as you were saying, idiosyncrasy, and Kemp, as you were saying, 80% in, and what's that 20 that comes back out. Let's talk a little bit about what we're mastering now when when we're in this new era. So I'm going to start actually, Kemp, with you. We'll work backwards this time. So mastery, and I think this is actually what you were connecting to. Mastery is often about meaning, right? Like we go through this process of mastery because it's where we find meaning when we are working on these skills. So as you build AI integrated products, how do you preserve meaning? What is your team thinking about? And what do you have awareness of what might be being reshaped in the process or even replaced as AI enters these technologies?
Well, I think there's two ways maybe that I could address this. And I mean, the first way I'm going to address it, or try to address it, I apologize, is more of a artistic analogy. So the analogy is a photographer goes out in the street and they're trying to make a piece of art. They have intention and they have intuition, and they take a picture, they format, and they represent something that they feel is super representative of their artistic practice, and that image that comes back then has meaning for them. I go to ChatGPT and I say, please, could I have a picture of Paris in the 1950s? And ChatGPT is kind enough to give me a picture of Paris in the 1950s. It has a woman off to the left. It has the Eiffel Tower in the background and cars on the side, and it's quite a beautiful picture, in fact. And I think that what the question of meaning in that context is, where's the meaning formed? And I think that someone might come to that picture, that ChatGPT, the Paris photo picture, and they might have a good reaction to that. They might have a relationship to that picture. They might find meaning through the way that they interpret that image, just as they might do the same from the street photographer who made that image. But I think the difference here is actually the relationship between the viewer or the participant and the source of the actual work. So there's double layers of meaning. When I'm looking at a piece of art, I'm connecting that to the creator of that art. I'm connecting to a greater context, and that's not something that we get through AI. And so I think that one way of thinking about meaning is actually about source and how we relate to source. If I can add on that, and just a little bit, is I think that kind of what you were getting at with the mirror on the wall is, I also think about this idea of intuition and intention. So that street photographer had a great degree of intuition and intention as they went out to do that work and make that work, and it's embedded in that work. ChatGPT, I gave it one little piece of intention, and it crowdsourced the rest of the intention. And so it brought back something which is based on all kinds of other intention that I couldn't obviously give it, or I could have given it, but it's not there. And I think that so now coming back to our work and what we make, we're thinking about these two components of it's kind of spectrum, as it were, of intuition and intention, and we're thinking about how to craft interfaces that then help people communicate in their intention and to act on their intuition. And so ultimately, that ability to give intention and act on intuition as an interface with the AI is a way of getting more value back. And so that's that's we're creating search interfaces for the IA, for Accor, which is a big hospitality group, and that's kind of at the core of what we're working on.
Can you just say that again? You said put intention in. Can you say that pathway again?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I will say that I
was mesmerized.
what we're trying to do is build interfaces that allow you to communicate your intention or to act on your intuition. So, I think that that's the really interesting thing about AI is that we have opportunity because it's crowdsourcing intention. It's giving us back things that then we can respond to in any kind of way. We haven't given it all of our intention, but we can actually use our own intuition to then get closer and closer to the thing that we want to make or we create, and it can be quite a creative act.
That's really beautiful. So, Forrest, I'm curious then from your experience, where have you integrated AI into your creative practice aside from the fish that you were making? And how has it changed what you consider mastery? Like, what do you think about in terms of mastery then when you're interacting? Like, what are you mastering when you're interacting with these tools?
So I think building off of something that Kemp said, I think specifically it's really shifted a focus into meaning. I think the nuance for me is that I often conflated mastery and fluency. And fluency is understanding like the form language is something that it's supposed to look like something, right? So fluency would be like the Parisian picture would have the Eiffel Tower and the woman off to the side and someone holding a baguette or something. And you'd be like, oh, they're fluent in the language of Paris. But to me, mastery has meaning, and that meaning comes through, to me, a depth of idiosyncrasy. And I think the most frightening, exciting part of AI is that the mirror proposition, the if I could ask anything, what am I going to ask, is ultimately a question of who do you want to be? And the truly provocative work, I think whether it's cinematic or whether it's a painting, it's actually propelled by trauma. And if we really are looking at a Picasso or Guernica, we're looking at a Jackson Pollock, we're looking at a Rothko, we become so emotionally vulnerable because the work is so naked and so raw. And so then the question is, if AI is just surfing across pattern recognition, can an AI ever experience trauma? Can it be propelled by the urgency to create? So we're talking about, neurosymbolic structuring of AI. How do you match pattern recognition with some type of syntax or logic? But I would argue that there's actually a quality of neurodivergence that AI actually struggles with, because neurodivergence is a statistical outlier, whereas AI is focusing on the bell curve. And so to me, this is a huge opportunity, but it's unfortunate because some of the people who are these statistical outliers are going, oh no, like AI is going to take my jobs or AI is going to displace me. And it's like, actually, the one thing AI cannot do is occupy the space of how you see the world. And so to me, that feels like that's very affirming, but the message needs to change from, I think the technocrats to the underrepresented voices for who I think AI is actually like just in the nick of time. And so I think back to your question on mastery, mastery then moves away from fluency, which something had the illusion of fluency. I think that's what throws people off. It's like, oh, I just whipped up this painting. I just whipped up this architectural rendering. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't have meaning. You don't have a relationship to it. You don't understand why it exists in the way that it did, why it was urgent to create a living room that looked like that had to have a hearth off to the side. And so I think teasing apart mastery and fluency and seeing then mastery as a depth of idiosyncrasy and a closer proximity actually to trauma and what makes you, you.
Dina. So Dina is what I would call an AI native entrepreneur. So just as like, the millennials were known as digitally native, we are having kind of our first, cohort of AI native entrepreneurs. So Dina came into entrepreneurship using AI right away. And so Dina, I'm curious your experience. Like, you almost don't have the experience of the absence or like the change of where the mastery lies. And so, from your perspective, what do you feel like AI has helped you master in such a short time? And maybe, do you want to share when it was you launched your business?
Sure. Yes, that was part of the plan.
Okay.
So, why Holly asked me to share when I launched my business was that it's 6 months ago, almost to the day. Like, very new here. I am also a solopreneur, which I think is. Thank you. So, I know a lot of people in this room have been in this seat. But I think it would have been a completely different experience had I launched my company a year and 6 months ago. From the second that I had the realization I needed to start my own company to deliver civil engineering as I want to deliver my projects for my clients, it's been a conversation with AI. I am very much in the operations building and systematizing phase. So I can't fully speak to executing the technical with, the mastery of AI. But especially that I've worked with Holly so closely and Matt in the business growth for creative entrepreneurship class, I have a very solid foundation of what my vision and purpose for my company is, which has all been fed into AI. And chat is able to remind me that and weave that into all of the operations manuals and templates and an onboarding that I am developing from the very beginning. That said, I am also developing everything from the ground up, and it has been a very collaborative process, which I never thought I would be able to say as a one-person company. So it's also kind of scratched that itch a little bit in that engineering is it's a group sport. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring up that last night I was prepping for this panel with my chatbot in Prospect Park, having a dialogue with her playing Holly. So, but just to also piggyback on, I think what Forrest was saying about the idiosyncrasies. The last question I answered, I think I talked a lot about nuance. And I think that is where the genius of my company lies, of being able to navigate those more nuanced situations. And that is where it has fallen short for me. But with everything, I don't know, every day, week, month, there's a new technology out. I have a feeling I won't be saying that for too much longer. And the more I get to work with it on the projects that I typically work on with such nuance, it will be able to learn from me how me and my team navigate such complexities.
Amazing. So I want to bring in our final spirit before we complete our seance, and I want to invoke Frances Perkins. So is anybody familiar with Frances Perkins? Friends. I knew Dina would be. Yes. Okay. So Frances Perkins was the U.S. Labor Secretary from 1933 to 1945, the first female cabinet position holder, right? So all of your labor rights are in thanks to Frances Perkins. So big round of applause for Frances. Thank you. And we invoke her spirit tonight because after witnessing the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, which, being New Yorkers, we're all familiar with, it was really her who brought, safety regulations, fire codes, labor protections. And she saw regulations not as red tape, but really as an expression of care, of ethics, and of public trust. And as we think about, the bigger picture of AI, and, I know there was an announcement yesterday, maybe not formal, but informal, that this administration doesn't necessarily want to regulate AI. It brings up a lot of questions about what responsibility do we have as leaders who are using these tools, and what do we want to see? So bringing Frances into the mix, I want to talk a little bit about that and how it relates. And so actually, I'm going to go back with you first, Dina, because you're so used to regulations. As a civil engineer, you've really had to adapt to them as a foundation for safety and stability. So what lessons do you think that we can take from your field and apply to regulating AI?
I just have to say, I like regulations. I I very much relate to Frances Perkins. But I think oftentimes regulation gets confused with overregulation. And for that topic, I'll refer everyone to read Abundance by Desiree Klein and Derek Thompson, or discuss it with Holly. But regulation in itself is not red tape. It's a way of protecting the public and environment and even public interest. And I view codes as a way of codifying ethics. As a professional engineer, I needed to take an exam, and I'm sure I signed some oath somewhere that says I will protect the well-being of the public in the designs that, I play a part in. And with that comes a professional judgment. I'm not sure if something like that exists in the field of AI, but I would encourage it to. And in a lot of the class we spoke about this week, it's about the lack of regulation, but it's also about how not everything just spits out and is regulated, right? Sometimes you need to know what the use cases are or where it could go wrong or what you need to be aware of before you could assign kind of this overarching federal regulation. So I think it kind of starts at the local level, like everything does. And for us, I think it starts with our practice as entrepreneurs or having small businesses of actually putting up those guardrails so that we feel safer and we know how we're using the tool. And then maybe for us to share those guardrails kind of with others to instill that safety. Because I think it is just a group of best practices at this point.
So Forrest, let's feed in the creative perspective. I'm curious about how art, design, and storytelling can help people emotionally feel the ethical stakes of AI and not just understand them abstractly.
Yeah, I think I'm going to zoom out and look at all of those different disciplines as basically creating signals. And I think a signal can be honest or a signal can be, dishonest. And I think that's the opportunity that nature gives us, right? To deceive or to be true. And I think that very quickly we're going to see the perils of dishonesty and deception. Something as simple as voice or face authentication. Many people in AI are saying, how do banks still use voice and face authentication? Because literally tomorrow someone could release an AI that can impersonate your voice quite easily, or face, and pretty soon even a FaceTime and actually have a clone that has likeness to a family member. So ransomware and all types of things, that the dark patterns that potentially could proliferate are profound. And I think it will recast what it means to make something, not just in the sense of pure indulgence or the ecstasy of craft, but ultimately the ethical underbelly of what it means to make something and what it means to Dina's point, to do no harm.
And finally, Kemp, I'm curious what you think creatives are uniquely able to sense that technologists and economists might overlook, right? So what do you think creatives can sense, and how can you use that intuition to shape the future of AI?
Well, I think that those two groups might be thinking a little bit more pragmatically. And I think coming back to something I said earlier, I think that creatives are going to be thinking about authorship. And the importance of authorship and how authorship is maintained. We worked last year with Adobe and the Content Authenticity Initiative, which is a way of plugging basically an identity and a source into image making or digital images, basically. So I think that kind of thing is something that creatives will bring to the table. And the other, which I think relates a little bit to what you were saying, Forrest, is kind of the relationship. So I think that creatives are a little more tapped into the fact that we build relationships with technology and we build relationships with the brands, and they show up in different ways. And I think that they will be a little bit more aware and cognizant of what it means for AI to be able to fake and create entities, as you were saying, Forrest. But also, I think just aware of the possibilities of what it means. Like, with whom am I making a relationship? You conjured the mirror. You have your consultant assistant, and we all sort of have a different kind of relationship to our way of using AI right now. And one of the things we think a lot about is how does a brand show up in the near future in the new sort of AI landscape that we're creating? Right now, most of us are engaging with AI through either products that embed it in them or through a chatbot. And most of what we get back from that is, walls of text. And it's not a very emotional relationship, other than the fact that, we probably all use different ones and we have a different relationship with each of them because they have a slightly different way of talking. But it's not yet at the point where brands are in the conversation and brands are showing up in our LLMs or in whatever that future operating system is. And so I think we will be thinking a lot about how are relationships defining our need for regulation and our need for thinking about what that means in the future.
So I just want to ask, does anybody here have a question for the panel? I'm not going to take it yet, but I am just curious. Okay, so let's finish our seance and bring it all together, and then we have a little bit of extra time, and I know that we're mic'd, and so you're going to have to come up and step up and speak into the mic for the question, or we'll get it to you. Ryan, maybe you can help carry a microphone to the audience. Okay, so when we have a seance with ChatGPT, what you do, if you're interested in doing this yourself, is you're going to take your spirits that you brought to the table, and as well as your panelists that you have with you, and you're going to ask ChatGPT who you've conjured in this seance, as of all of you coming together. So I'm curious who you think we might have conjured tonight according to ChatGPT. And if you guess this, you have won. You don't need AI. You are AGI. So does anybody have any guesses they want to throw out there? Who? Sam Altman. Shh, no. Anybody else? Okay, the big reveal without my glasses. We conjured Hypatia. Does anybody know Hypatia of Alexandria? No. Okay, well, wait for it. All right. So Hypatia was a 4th century astronomer, mathematician, and philosopher, widely regarded as the first recorded female intellectual in Western history. Brilliant, ethical, and fearless, she taught publicly in Alexandria until she was murdered for her refusal to conform to political and religious orthodoxy. Hypatia likely would have approached AI with reverence and caution. She might not ask, can we build it, but rather, does it elevate our wisdom or merely accelerate our ignorance? Hypatia leaves us with a final question. When the structures around you collapse, what inner discipline will remain to guide your truth? Kemp, we'll start with you.
So I think the discipline that I would stick to guide my truth is difficulty and discomfort lead to growth and learning. And I think that's hyper relevant in a time when we have lots and lots of outputs and lots of things coming at us. And the easy route seems the easy one.
Yeah, I definitely think it's your point of view, whoever you are and whatever that might be. For me, it's why I became a civil engineer, to serve communities and leave a long-lasting impact.
Love.
Love. Oh, beautiful. Okay. with that, we'll open the floor to questions. So if you have a question, Ryan's going to bring you the microphone. That's what husbands are for.
It's actually an off-white. It's more like a yellow. Anyway, so I'm a graphic designer, and so I don't want to be like too aggressive, but one question I have with like AI is that I hear a lot of people say how there's like environmental impacts and also like the moral side effects. And then also I've just heard people say that like if OpenAI were to like go bankrupt or something, that would be an issue. How do you think that would affect like the current industry, or if a couple more years go by and like obviously so many industries are adapting AI, how like that would affect if like let's just say hypothetically that it all just went like belly up and just like everyone's become so reliant on AI and then it's just gone. Would that be a bad thing? Would that even be a good thing? Because now we kind of have to like really lock in.
I think we're in a little bit of a what I call a U.S. bubble. I think that China is basically 7.5 years ahead of us in almost every single field, and we're just in denial about that. Having worked at Rivian, I remember we were doing an initiative where we're looking into let's see if we can go into China and try to find a way to basically sell EVs, and realizing that they were already making EVs that were basically $20,000 in dark factories that were basically unmanned, and threading AI through those vehicles is software defined. And I think when you are looking at a country like that as open source and as kind of constantly surveilling, the AI is accelerating so much faster than hey, can you check this email for me? Like the AI is scanning like huge swaths of billions of people like 24/7. So I think that's one thing, is that for better or for worse, I think that some of those open source tools, whether we view them as dangerous or questionable because they're coming from China, I think are equivalent or superior to a lot of the American tools. So I think that's one. So even if OpenAI collapses, there'll be plenty of tools. I think the bigger question, for like design industry is, designers oftentimes are, in providing some type of service. And largely the consultancy model is based on team and time, which is basically at odds with all the assumptions around AI, that you shouldn't need a team and you shouldn't take any time. And so I think the challenge for design is to prove out how is that fee structure stabilizing? Like how are you actually protecting the time to do deep and valuable work that's not just about speed and acceleration, but how do you actually preserve the ability to, one, be compensated for your work, but then also to how can your work be and remain valuable if the consultancy model is put into question?
Thank you.
Hey, first of all, thank you very much for a very different kind of AI panel than we normally get, which is, so thank you for your insights. One thing I think about a lot as a fellow solopreneur and putting it into workflow is that, I'm in my late 40s, so I knew what the world looked like before, and I know what I think good is, and in your work, you have to have taste and discernment. But I think about young people all the time that are growing up with this, and I don't know what advice to have when it's often, large language models are being treated as a magic 8-ball, and you're just kind of throwing it out and seeing what you get. But if you don't know what good looks like, how do you steer people towards discernment and taste?
I can jump in. That's a phenomenal question. So I think the one thing, the one thing is I feel like, so many of the younger folks that I talk to that are going, they're saying, oh my goodness, what do I do? What do I do? The entry-level jobs are no longer there. The rungs of the ladder are disappearing. And it's like, that's true, but you've also been like editing in camera, basically video, since you were like 4 years old. I remember when I was like 21 and I was like, can I check out the camcorder from the library? And it was this big. It's like, you're editing. Like you're not even conscious of the skills that you have. And so I think a lot of times, like, especially our generation is the problem, Like we're problematizing their skills, which are so innate and so fluid that we're creating a sense of anxiety. It's actually, we're problematic by giving you a graphic design assignment that's creating a wine label. Like we should actually say, what do you want to make? Like what type of label should you make? Like maybe it's a wine label, maybe it's something different. And so I think just really pushing into their depth of idiosyncrasy, because the job that they may or may not have probably hasn't even been defined yet. So it'd be mostly problematic for you to say, well, according to my professional opinion, what you need for job readiness is like that job is already gone. Like every word that you're saying is just like disappearing and like exploding. So I think it's like, wow, like, you know, you as the inheritor of this new future, what do you feel? What is your intuition? And what do you feel is something that you want to make and go do? Because really there's nothing stopping you. Like you no longer need the amounts of capital that we did. You no longer need the teaming and the resourcing, or even potentially like a mentor, because you can have, you know, a bot or a seance.
So I just started a new job leading a team of creatives, graphic designers, video editors, creative strategists in a performance marketing agency that is like very, very, very data and performance driven. And I just sold, this company bought my company, which was video production. And so we were purely creative. And I'm realizing very quickly that a lot of my role here is going to be increasing output using AI and not increasing headcount, but just like massively scaling that production. But what I'm seeing with the team right away is they're already so tapped out, and their biggest challenges are that they have no time to think, and the company wants them to think, but also wants them to exponentially increase their output. And so the question that I have is like, how would you think as leaders in creative spaces to like create the time within an organization for people to have that creative ability, or to have the time to actually process and think and develop new ideas when the profit motive is so strong to just scale output and just throw stuff out there and see what works?
I think we're going to have to suffer through like 12 to 18 months of just panicked frenzy, unfortunately, because everybody is so concerned that they're behind and they're not doing AI correctly, or they're not producing, you know, volume or iterations. I think we're going to see, and this is where we talk about kind of regulation, is that US may not regulate dark patterns for a number of reasons, but people will just leave. Like they will just leave places they don't trust, and they will start to form these dark forest communities where they find people of like mind, like spirit, and those will be very, very difficult for companies to get into. You'll have to have like a special key and a special access code and not be sketchy. And a lot of brands will die on the outside of these spaces because they'll be used to basically finding people on the social graph and kind of doing kind of lazy performance marketing, which is like, oh, according to the social graph, this is, a male who likes to cook and blah, blah, blah. And so it's like, we don't know anything about these people. They're inside of this weird cave and they're doing weird things, making up weird signals and things. And we're just trying to get in and be relevant. So I think that's one thing, is that people are going to relocate. Then I think you're going to see basically the collapse of media and research and insight and analytics, because how you will find access to those people, they're going to be looking at different media surfaces altogether. They're not going to be gazing upon the big billboards or the bus stops. They're going to be looking at very intimate product screens. And so I think it's going to change how media is consumed, but also how we imagine kind of prototyping, on those surfaces. I do think when that moment happens and we come out of the panic frenzy, I am so excited to be able to have more time. We were talking earlier about, I just want to have walking meetings. I just want to walk and talk, and let the AI do the things that require very kind of tedious things, but to have more time to go deeper in a project or deeper in a conversation. But I think to your point, we're going to evolve where the iterative capacity is going to change definition from, you told me 2 and now you told me 2,000. That's the current state. But in the future, it's going to be like, with 2,000 versions of this, I can find that it's not the guy with the dog, it's not the guy with the dog wearing the big hat, it's the guy with the big hat and the dog with the cast on his leg. That's the one. And once I know that's actually what the audience wants, I can go deeper into that, knowing that I've triangulated something that's no longer abstract. And I think that becomes maybe a newfound joy for those people who are making something, as they know who they're building the relationship with, back to what Kemp was saying.
the other not sexy answer is it's the difficult choice that has to be made about how much profit and how much growth in future development and learning and whatnot.
Thanks. In advance, sorry, this question might be a little rambly as I wrap my head around it. I'm a creative light, but like appreciator. Leading with, did you see that art piece at MoMA that was like this amalgamation of all the different works that they have in their collection brought through AI in a video screen? It was one of the most like insane and moving pieces that I've seen recently. And I now work at an agency, but I used to work at Polaroid. And Polaroid's initial coming to the service was people were saying that this is going to make photography, something that is available to the masses in a negative way. But it really was a democratization of photography. And it didn't make it so that the art form was less, of a fine art form. It just kind of changed who was able to do it. And I guess my thought process on AI in a creative space, based on seeing some of these really moving art pieces, is that it's actually going to be a tool that, like speaking to mastery, actually shows that those who can identify themselves and have this like very unique perspective with all of this information and this real democratization of all these different types of coding and learning that you can now get are really going to be the ones that come to the forefront. So, I guess any thoughts on that, or like kind of this AI art component?
Well, I love that you brought in historical parallels. We think back to the emergence of photography, right? It was called the death of painting. But ultimately, painting was very stodgy and stiff, right? Painting was just doing, documentary portraits of basically like wealthy patrons and, historical moments. It's like, go painting. And then painting was freed up to go back to it's like cave origins of being ecstatic expression, right? Your Jackson Pollocks, of course, that's where painting was able to free itself from the shackles of documentation. I think similarly, photography went through some similar thing, where it's just like, no, only photographers can do this. And all of a sudden, if it's democratized, does it devalue photography? And it goes back to that assignment, which is like, the two camps. One was told like, hey, you're going to be judged on how many pots you make, and you're going to be judged by making the perfect pot. And ultimately, the best pots came from the people with the high volume, because it was through the repetition, it's through the democratization of being able to make and make and make and fail and fail and fail that they actually found their voice through something. So I do think democratization is also the ease of failing and trying and failing and trying to be able to find your voice. So I do think in democratization is also potentially a faster path, to mastery, but not fraught with some obstacles. But I think it's a very nice parallel to actually to Polaroid and to photography, and even beyond Polaroid, from digital to film. People are like, digital is going to be the end. It's the same thing. It's like, no, that's going to ruin our thing. And it's like, ooh, this frees us up to do this other thing. And so I think, AI initially is seen as a displacer, but I think it's going to cause us to re-examine what it is. What does it mean to be making this? What does it mean to be an illustrator? What does it mean to be a painter?
I think we have time for one more question.
Sam Altman.
In disguise. Do you distinguish between intelligence and wisdom? And if so, do you feel like, are there any signals that LLMs or AI or any of these technologies are capable of wisdom? Or is that something that we feel is going to stay as a human thing?
I think it depends on the definition of intelligence. I think that I feel like intelligence is adaptive capacity. And so I think that if, it's a Stanford Binet like IQ test, I think that's one type, or like Elon Musk, like Grok 4, it's like PhD level, can do anything better. It's like, if I asked that PhD level Grok 4 to design like a perfect bicycle, it wouldn't design it as the finest, bicycle maker, right? So it seems like it's a very narrow definition of intelligence. Whereas I think as wisdom, if intelligence is basically a series of accrued knowledge with the understanding of how this relates to a particular context and my ability to relate to that, then wisdom is like a universe of intelligences, right? Where you're able to understand, like, what did that intelligence mean at that moment in time? What did that reaction to that particular context? And so wisdom to me is just a more profound umbrella of intelligences, which are, this adaptive capacity, but different from knowledge, different than facts, and I think not constrained by really rigid definitions of intelligence.
I wasn't. That was beautiful.
Did anybody realize when she said that's what husbands are for? What that Dionne Warwick deep cut with like psychic friends? I was like, that was such a perfect seance that'll.
We can karaoke it now. Surprise. Well, I know we're at time, so I want to be respectful of the cinema and just say thanks to everyone for coming out tonight and for having this dialogue. Thank you, Kemp. Thank you, Dina. Thank you, Forrest. It's been a true pleasure, and I'm really excited. And, so much I think is going to change over the next year and 18 months, as you say, Forrest. And I hope that we stay in dialogue about that in the meantime. So thank you, everyone.